The U.S. banned the slave trade in 1808, but started a new horrific chapter for the black African slaves present. You see, only the slave trade was banned, not slavery. Slave owners were allowed to keep the slaves they had, but they could not import more from Africa. This started breeding farms as they wanted more slaves to work on plantations. Yes, much like animal breeding farms where multiplying is the only objective, black men and women slaves were forced to mate to produce hundreds of children. And as a healthy male is necessary to mate with many females in the case of animal breeding, the white supremacist slave owners were looking for the same muscular black man with robust traits. Then they found a black slave man named Pataseka, who was forced to mate with hundreds of black women slaves to breed over 200 children. In what conditions Pataseka would have mated with black women slaves and how inhuman he would have felt. Welcome to a new episode of Black Culture Diary, a channel where we talk about less known and hidden black history, culture, arts, and lost civilization. We scrutinize history here to bring the black culture back on the surface again. We would like to thank you, the members of our community who have been watching our videos and supporting us. For those who are new, we encourage you to join our community in supporting and building a strong black history education medium. In this episode, we will tell you the horrific story of Pataseka, the black slave man who was forced to mate and breed. Let's get started. After the slave trade was banned and many slaves suffered and died from the harsh labor they were forced to do, there was a shortage of slaves. The slave masters faced a problem that was costing them profits and needed a quick solution. Since they couldn't get more slaves from Africa like before, they came up with an evil idea that only someone who thought of humans as objects could think of. This terrible idea treated people as if they were animals, like cows or horses, and took away their rights as human beings. Their chilling idea was to make black African women slaves have more children. Since these black women were slaves, their children were slaves too, under the law. That's when people came to know how the state and legislature had wittingly left a loophole for slavery to continue, even after the slave trade was banned. The act passed in 1808 was the act prohibiting the importation of slaves, not slavery itself. Hence, the slave masters saw the black women slaves' ability to have children as a way to make more slaves. They forced them to have more children, even if they didn't want to. During this dark time, terms like breeders, breeding slaves, childbearing women, breeding period, and too old to breed became commonly used. This was a terrible practice that aimed to solve the shortage of slaves, even though it would hurt the future generations of those who were enslaved. During this time, the story of a man named Pataseka stands out. He became known for fathering an incredibly large number of children, like a whole village. In turn, his children would be used as slaves to work in cotton and sugar plantations. He would be taken to slave breeding farms where black women slaves were mated by him. Yes, he was treated less than human, much like a good stock horse, whose children would have the same traits he had. Since he was muscular and capable of doing heavy lifting and working in plantations without stopping, his children were destined to inherit the same traits. The slave owners and masters knew that and thought of capitalizing on this biological advantage Pataseka had. But his name wasn't actually Pataseka. Behind this name lay a true identity, Roque Jose Florencio, a soul born in the heart of Africa, whose destiny intertwined with the brutal chains of enslavement within the borders of Brazil. His days were etched with the cruel scars of oppression, a dark testament to the inhumanity that stained those times. Roque's existence was marred by a tragic role, one that robbed him of his humanity and autonomy. He became a breeder, a title that stripped him of his individual desires, shaping him into a mere instrument for the benefit of his owner. Yes, he would mate with whomever his masters ordered, with the sole purpose of producing more slave children. Those children, from the very moment they were born, were brought up to be the next generation of slaves who will work in plantations. Again, those children would be forced to intermarry, preserving their strong traits and creating a robust workforce. The ultimate goal was to have an ideal number of slaves which could sustain the whole institution of slavery. They would mate and breed, as animals do, and multiply the population, without the need to import them from Africa. Hailing from the town of Sorocaba in Sao Paulo, Roque's path was dictated by bondage. His ownership shifted to a farmer named Francisco da Cunha Bueno in São Carlos, Sao Paulo, marking a life trapped within the confines of captivity. But Pataseka didn't work in plantations. His owner, Francisco, entrusted him with unconventional responsibilities, tasks that transcended the boundaries of typical slave labor. Roque found himself tending to the farm, journeying between rural villages and the bustling city of São Carlos. But don't confuse those farms with animal farms. Rather, those were slave breeding farms where black African women slaves were kept to be bred. Much like animal breeding farms, where animals are forced to mate, this was no different. Pataseka would mate with black women slaves, after which those women were forced to work in plantations. Yes, despite carrying babies in their bellies, they had to work. While Pataseka would be forced to mate with more women every day. This was because of Pataseka's towering stature, reaching an impressive 7 feet and 2 inches. His lithe legs and his formidable hands and feet painted a striking picture. These physical attributes bestowed upon him the moniker Pataseka, which translated to dry paw. This name stemmed from a custom among the black slaves on the farm, where they were assigned animal names. Since Pataseka's traits could allow more work to be done, his owner forced Pata to mate with all black women slaves he had. In that way, the slave children would have the same tall height, muscular body, and strong hands, things that could bring more profits to slave owners. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Superstitions of that era held that tall men with lean legs possessed a higher likelihood of fathering male offspring, a trait highly coveted for labor-intensive tasks. Thus, Roque was thrust into the role of a breeder by his owner, an ominous designation tasked with impregnating the female slaves on the farm. The legacy of Pataseka transcends generations. Today, approximately 30% of the population in the district of Santa Eudoxia, São Carlos, can trace their roots back to him. His role as a breeder aimed to bolster his owner's workforce, infusing it with genetically advantageous traits. His life became a theater of manipulation controlled by his owner's desires. He was carefully examined for diseases, provided with sustenance, and treated as though he were akin to livestock. The exact number of women Roque engaged with or the frequency of these interactions remains shrouded in mystery. However, it is believed that his legacy includes over 240 children, who then carried his genes to countless generations of slaves. These children, the products of his lineage, were born into the same chains of enslavement. Their lives mirrored the fate of their father, a life of subjugation, labor, and cruelty. Some were sold as commodities, their worth measured by profit, while others were forced to work on their owners' lands, their innocent childhood stolen away. The tale of Roque's offspring is one etched in pain. Their formative years were consumed by grueling labor on plantations and in households. The joy of a normal childhood was a luxury denied to them, their innocence forever eclipsed by the grim reality of slavery. However, amidst the horrors of this era, Pataseka's life embarked on a distinct trajectory, fueled by his extraordinary ability to father offspring. His prowess as a breeder earned him a measure of favor from his owner, granting him privileges that set him apart. Since he was the father of all children slaves who were bringing profits and will continue for their entire life, Pataseka was often given some favors. But what? Well, instead of working like an animal in plantations and being tortured, he was asked to sell his humanity. You see, the history books often highlight the stance that Pataseka didn't face what horrors other slaves did. But they ignore the fact that Pata was ripped of his humanistic traits. He was made the very first human breeder, who would mate with black women slaves whenever ordered. If that's a concession, then perhaps those historians should work on their moral and ethical standards. But in the end, the parcel of land became his only tangible asset after working years and breeding hundreds of children. With the abolition of slavery in 1888, Pataseka embarked on a new chapter, characterized by newfound freedom and opportunities. Love blossomed in the form of Palmyra, leading to the birth of 9 children. This family, nurtured on the land bestowed by his former master, became the bedrock of his life. As a free man, Pataseka undertook a journey to manifest his dreams into reality. He put his energies in the pursuit of a better life for his family. Embracing the role of a farmer, he established his domain, named Sitio Pataseka. Amidst the fields, he cultivated and sold cane sugar. Though his earnings remained modest, they constituted the sustenance that nourished his family's well-being and nurtured his aspirations. Pataseka's life journey came to an end on June 13, 1958, when he reached the remarkable age of 130. As his life's final chapter unfolded, he found peace lying in his bed in Santa Eudoxia, Brazil. Around him were his loved ones, surrounding him with heartfelt songs and solemn prayers, paying tribute to the legacy he had woven throughout his years. Pataseka had lived through a whirlwind of historical events in Brazil. He had seen the tide of change that brought an end to slavery in 1888, the declaration of the Republic in 1889, the rise and fall of various leaders, the upheaval of 2 world wars, and the rise of social movements. Pataseka's role as a slave breeder exposes the harsh reality of the cruel system that dominated his era. Slavery was more than just hard labor. It was a sinister plan to sustain itself by producing generation after generation of enslaved individuals. Just as animals are bred for specific traits, human beings were subjected to a degrading process that ignored their rights and autonomy, reducing them to mere instruments. The chilling truth is that they were stripped of their humanity, deprived of rights, emotions, and the ability to choose their own paths. Their lives were puppet strings, controlled by their owners. The practice of breeding slaves was devoid of compassion. It was a heartless strategy to ensure a continuous workforce, prolonging the cycle of suffering. Don't you think that what the slave owners did was a crime against humanity? Isn't it true that black slaves were seen as animals which should breed more and more? Let us know what you think after knowing the story of Pataseka. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.